All right, guys, so in the last video, we set up our context, we set up our GitHub state file with the initial state and so on. Now we want to basically move everything from app.js to our context and to our state, and we want to have a reducer that's going to basically change the state of certain components that need changing when something happens. So right now, if I look at my React tools and I go on app here, it gives us excuse me, it gives us all the state via hooks, which you can't really, it's not really a good UI for this. They're redoing these React dev tools, I think, to incorporate hooks a little better. But what we want to do is move everything to the GitHub state provider, which is this right here. Remember, we have this value and we have user, all this stuff here. But notice that there's nothing in the users array because we haven't implemented it in our application yet. We've just set up the context and the state. So we're going to go one by one in the app.js. Excuse me. We're going to go one by one with these methods here, like search users, and we're going to move them to the GitHub state, basically to, as using them as actions. And then I'll show you how we can connect to the context within individual components using the use context hook. Okay, we also have to have some reducer functions. So this is a little hard to figure out how I want to do this in order to make it the most understandable. So I guess what we'll do is just grab search users, the entire thing here, and we'll just cut that from app.js. App.js is going to get completely cleaned up. So we're going to put this in our GitHub state right here where I have the comment search users. Now from here we want to let's see, so we want to set our loading to true. Now we don't have a set loading function, so let's create that real quick. It's going to be very simple. So right here we're just going to say const set loading and set that to an arrow. Now all we want this to do, this set loading, is dispatch to our reducer. So we do that with the dispatch that was pulled from the use reducer hook, and what we dispatch is an object that has a type. Okay, it has to have a type. You can send a payload with data if needed, but for this we don't actually need a payload, we just need the type, which is going to be set loading. Okay, and the reducer is going to catch that. We need to basically handle that within the reducer. And we already brought it in from type set loading. Okay, so we have that. Now we can just simply call set loading right here and search users. And then let's see, we make our request here. And what we want to do after that, we don't need to set loading because I'll show you why after. And then what we want to do is dispatch to the reducer an object, and the object is going to be search users. I'm sorry, the type, we want to put a type here, is going to be search users, and we want to send a payload. Okay, the payload is the data we want to send, and that's going to be the response data. So res.data. Okay, so two things are happening here. We have the search users, and then it calls set loading, which dispatches the type of set loading to the reducer, which we're going to create now. And then it makes the request, and then it sends the type, or dispatches the type of search users with the data. And our reducer is going to be responsible of putting this into our state and sending it down to any components that need it. So let's save this. And let's head into our GitHub reducer, and we want to import all of our types. So I'm actually going to copy that from here. So we're going to bring in all of our types, and a reducer is just a function. So we're going to export a default arrow function. And a reducer takes in two things: the state and action. Now, remember, when we dispatch that object to the reducer, it has a type and a possible payload. Now what we want to evaluate here is the type. We want to just put a JavaScript switch, and we want to say what is in this action dot type. All right, we're going to have certain cases. Now if it's for default, basically with no case, we're just going to return the state as is, like that. Okay, and then for any other cases, we're going to say case. So for instance, let's do our set loading. So for set loading, we want to return our state. Now, we want to return whatever is already in the state. State is immutable, meaning we can't reassign it. Okay, we can't just reassign it. We have to basically make a copy of it and then add any additions or changes to it. Now the way we can copy it is with the spread operator. We can just say triple dot and then state, and that's going to copy whatever's in the current state. Now what set loading does is it just sets the loading value to true, okay, because it's initially false. If we look in our GitHub state right here, loading is false, but when we make a request such as search users, we want to set it to true, and that's what this is going to do. This calls this, which dispatches set loading to the reducer, and it sets loading to true. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. Now let's add our search users case. So for search users, we're going to return, and we want to return the current state. So we're going to use a spread, and then the users is going to be filled with the payload. Remember, we made this request here, and we got res.data back from our request, and we're sending that to the reducer as the payload. Okay, whenever the type is search users, we're sending this payload. So we just want to add, this should actually be users, we just want to add action.payload, which is all of the users that are pulled from the GitHub API. And then finally we want to set loading to false. Okay, we do that here, so we don't need to do set loading false, after we make the request. It happens in the reducer. So I hope that makes sense. So let's save that. So we have our set loading and search users. Now we want to replace a couple things because we don't have our search user in app.js anymore, right? So if we go, let's see, we're actually not even, well, no, we'll just leave it for now. But down here, where we have our search component, we were passing in that search users. We no longer have to do that. We can access it through context. So I'm going to get rid of that and save. And now if I go to, let's see, users search.js, we no longer have search users as a prop. Excuse me. So the way that we do this is with the use context hook. So I'm actually going to get rid of search users from the props. We can also get rid of it from the prop types. And what we want to do now is bring in our context. So we're going to say import GitHub context from, we want to go up 2 levels into context, into GitHub, and then into GitHub context. And then in the function here, in the search function, we're going to initialize our GitHub context. So I'm going to go right above the text state here, and say const GitHub context, and set that equal to use context, which is a hook, which I still have to bring in. And then just pass in the GitHub context that we brought in right here. Now in order to use context, we need to bring that in as a hook. So I want to bring that in right there. Okay, now if we go down to where we actually call search users, this is now part of the GitHub context. Okay, so I can simply say GitHub context dot search users. Okay, now one thing I have to do is in our GitHub state, if we want to use this function, this action right here, search users, we just have to add it. We have to add it down here. So I'm just going to go right under loading. Let's put a comma here, and let's just add search users like that. That way it's available in the value of the context. In fact, if we go back here and we look at our GitHub state provider value, you'll see the function right here. All right, so I mean, if you can't see the benefit of what we just did, everything, we took the search user out of the main app component, and we no longer have to pass things, have to pass it in as a prop and catch it and all that. It's just, if we want to use that method in any component, all we have to do is bring in the context, initialize it, and then call whatever piece of state or whatever action we want that's associated with that context. So let's see if this actually works. It's a little weird because most of our application, it's still in the app.js file, but let's see what happens if we do this. So down here in the context provider, if we look in users, oh, I'm sorry, we need to use the items, res.data.items. So back in the GitHub state, the payload should be .items like that. Okay, so now if we search once again, it's not going to actually show in the UI because we haven't implemented context in this component yet. But if we look at the GitHub state provider and we look in value, you can see users is now full. Okay, we now have our users in our main app level state, okay, which is our GitHub context provider. All right, I hope that makes sense. Or I should say our GitHub state, because the provider is just, it does just that. It provides this to our React components wherever we need it. And we could use search users absolutely anywhere. We could use any of this stuff, any of this global state we can use in any component simply by bringing it in like this. Okay, so hopefully that makes a little sense. In the next video, we're going to continue on and clean up this app.js. We don't want anything coming from component level state. We're going to get rid of all this, and we're going to have it come from our GitHub state, which is our application level state. All right, so I'll see you in the next video.